Hello, everyone, and welcome to the show. I'm Kamini, and I'm your host for today. My guest today is Prof Emma Ruttkamp-Bloem, a globally recognized expert in AI ethics policy development. Welcome, Emma.
Hi, Kamini. Thank you for having me.
So, you're very welcome, Emma. Tell us how you went from a PhD in mathematical systems to, amongst other things, AI ethics researcher, professor, chair of UNESCO's World Commission on the Ethics of Scientific Knowledge and Technology, and former member of the UN AI Advisory Body.
Thank you for the question. Yeah, it's interesting. I think everybody has their little story, but my PhD was in mathematical logic, which I applied to problems in philosophy of science, specifically the problem of scientific realism. And for a long time, because I was working in mathematical logic, I got involved in AI, but in the old logic-based AI, through mathematical logic. And I joined the Center for AI Research in that group, working more on symbolic logic and knowledge representation and reasoning. But as data-driven AI became more and more, pressing and successful in the early 2000s, I started realizing that this is, I will have to do more than just be part of the mathematics, because of the implications that this kind of technology has for privacy issues, widening and not closing the inequality gap, and concerns around transparency, accountability, explainability, and so on. And at the time, there was nothing really happening in South Africa around AI ethics from philosophy departments. And so I started the AI ethics research group at the Center for AI Research, also in order to give my graduate students options for careers, and to show them that there are different ways in which one can be a philosopher in the real world.
Fantastic. Thanks, Emma. Interest in AI ethics because I look at AI as being a hyperscaler in terms of pushing the ethical evolution of humanity. Do you think that's just a lofty ideal, or is it something that it's actually materializing with the foundations that we are setting up?
Tell me if I'm misunderstanding you, but if you mean that the challenges that we might face in terms of potential harm to society, free engagement with AI technology, would force us to become better humans, if that is what you mean in terms of scaling ethics, yes. But otherwise, can please explain a little bit more about what it is that you mean?
So AI is becoming more pervasive in use globally. If we built in ethical frameworks for use in AI systems globally, what we are teaching people, what people automatically are getting the ethical principles that govern us as human beings at scale.
Yeah, I think that's a bit idealistic because, firstly, not, if we talk about, for instance, if you think about trying to think in terms of global governance of AI, and you think of a global ethics of AI, one of the big first questions that you come up against is what are shared values? Who decides what those values are, and who decide when it is possible to call, when one is able or warranted to refer to them as shared values. So that's the one thing, a more practical hurdle maybe. And then the other thing is simply that this is simply not how people engage with AI. AI, the pervasiveness of AI is one of the biggest threats that we face, because people see it as part of their lives now, and they don't always even realize what its impact on their lives is. But as with all things, that kind of brings comfort and speed. People don't want to hear that they have to think about, the repercussions of engaging with the technology, or the impact that it might have on vulnerable groups, or the geopolitical implications of the power of AI being centered around a particular group of people in the Northern Hemisphere. So I just don't think that ordinary people in the street, don't worry about the ethics of AI, for those reasons and many other reasons. Private sector companies are aware of it, but there is also pressure on them to produce, to stay, to be competitive, to adopt as fast as possible AI technologies that would help their business stay, in the forefront. And then the big tech companies, I mean, they want to do what they want to do, and the business model for AI is commodification of data for profit, and geopolitical power. So I just don't see it happening. It would have been nice, but I don't share that ideal. Well, I mean, I share the ideal, but I don't think we'll be able to realize it.
Oh, well, we can have a hope about it. So,
Yes.
so I mean, getting back to this issue of global standards, and you know, I tutor ethics in AI course part time, and what comes up always is the subjective nature of values, and how do you navigate when fundamental values seem to be in conflict. So you had the unique experience of working both at UNESCO and UN advisory board level on AI ethics, and these are very different forums with different mandates. So how do these experiences compare, and what does it actually take to get 193 countries to agree on anything related to AI ethics? When I first read it, I thought, oh my goodness, it must be like herding cats. I cannot imagine. I cannot imagine.
Well, it is a little bit like that, I must confess. But I think on the one hand, just first in terms of how the experiences compare, the goals kind of overlapped, at least in the sense in which I am connected, or in which I interact with UNESCO as the chair of the World Commission on the Ethics of AI and World Commission on the Ethics of Scientific Knowledge and Technology. And the work that I did on the recommendation on the ethics of AI, as the chair of the ad hoc expert group that drafted it, on the one hand, and then being a member of the UN, the Secretary General's UN advisory body. In both instances, the focus is on trying to get global agreement on how to go about how to engage with the technology in ways that would ensure benefit to all. And this actually means that the focus is should not be so much on the technology, but actually on the society. For technology to benefit us, we have to ask, what kind of society is it that we have to have in place so that everybody in that society could benefit from engaging with the technology? So it flips it around a little bit. So in that sense, it's the same, but obviously UNESCO, also being a UN body, but UNESCO has also, focus on education, on culture, on apart from science. And but the UNESCO recommendation was the first global normative instrument on the ethics of AI, and the UN advisory body work focused on how to go about what kind of mechanisms we should put in place, how we should be thinking about getting workable, actionable global AI governance in place. Firstly, why do we need it? And then how to go about it. So in that sense, it was more or less the same. I think, in terms of what it takes to get countries to agree, 193 member states to agree, you need a lot of patience, and you need to know what it is that you are talking about. You need to know the technology, and you need to know the impact that it potentially could have, and you need to know what to put in place to ensure that there is benefit and not harm. So it's not something that you can just do, off the cuff. You need to persevere and to be willing also to compromise and to negotiate, precisely because of what you mentioned, that countries come from different perspectives. They find themselves at different stages of readiness for the technology, for engaging with the technology. And also, I think something that's really very important is that epistemic justice should be in place. And this simply means that you have to be able to recognize every contributor as a credible knower, as a person who has a legitimate contribution to make, and that has the right to be heard and the right to be understood. So it takes a lot, but it is possible. Yeah, I don't know. You can ask, if it's not clear, you can ask me more. I don't want to keep on saying the same thing.
No,
Thanks.
thank you for that. Thank you for that. I can imagine from my perspective that because of the subjective or the perceived subjective nature of values, that there would be an issue. But apart from looking at the definitions itself and having agreement on them, what are some of the biggest obstacles you've encountered in trying to build consensus? And what were some of the breakthrough moments? A very simple example, I was talking to you about the big debate comes back on the subjective nature of ethics and morality, because we use the example, the statue of David, and one person perceives it to be pornographic, one person perceives it to be art, and that sort of thing. But I can imagine that to be an issue, but what other obstacles did you encounter that, as you say, in terms of the epistemic value of it, it was the feedback was valuable in that context, but you found it difficult to adapt that to the framework you were trying to build?
Okay, let me first say something about the subjective nature of values, because I think that is, while I totally agree with you that we have to face that fact, whether one sees it as an obstacle or not, I also think that it suits, and obviously this is not what you are doing, but I mean, in conversations around global AI governance, this is sometimes used to put a spanner in the works of consensus for governance of global governance of AI systems. So it's like, well, people have different ethical values, so we can't do this through an ethical lens. So because anything goes, and and it all just peters into nothingness. And that is in fact not the case. If you think of ethics as a dynamic reasoning system, ethics is not. It's not about the particular school of ethics, so whether or approach to ethics. Let's start there. You have, for instance, collectivist approaches in the global south typically, and you would have individualist approaches in the north. As gross generalization, but that's more or less just to get the two on the table. And then you have different schools of thought. So you have the ontology, which is about having a particular universal law according to which one decides what the right thing to do is. You have consequentialism, which focuses on the outcomes of the act that you are about to commit, and that through that determining whether it's the right thing to do or not. We have virtue ethics, which is based on simply living a life, striving to live a life of virtue throughout your life, seeing it as a journey. So it's more an individual kind of focus. Communitarianism, which is more about community values and what is it that we need to have in place so that communities are not harmed, and so on. And then we have, we have to think, when we think in terms of the context of technology, we need to be able to determine what is the optimal way to solve an ethical dilemma. So if I say to you that I have a technology that can cure cancer, an AI technology that can cure cancer, but unfortunately I will have to share your biological data with X number of third parties. That's an ethical dilemma, because I cannot promise that I can protect your privacy or your whole family's privacy because it's biological data, but here it is, I can save your life. And then you need to be able to build an argument and to reason around this and to ask questions. Is this a real ethical dilemma? Is it maybe just that maybe the technology just needs to mature, so it's put to you as if it's a dilemma, but it isn't a dilemma? Or if it is a real dilemma, then we have to say, well, in the context within which you find yourself, what is the most applicable or the most optimal way in which you can solve this dilemma? Is it through communitarian thinking? Is it through consequentialism, or what is it? So it's never, when we talk about the subjectiveness of values, that's maybe in the ordinary day-to-day life. But if you think about AI ethics, you need to be able to give a reason for your judgment. You need to be able to give a rational argument for why it is the best thing to do A in situation B. And it will differ. It will differ from sector to sector. Healthcare is not the same as mining. It's not the same as education. It's not the same as agriculture. So, the contextualism around ethics is what makes it so interesting, while it makes it so challenging. But this means that you need to have certain skills in place, and that just, having reams and reams and lists of principles, of ethical principles, and say, well, okay, I pick this one, I pick that one today and that one tomorrow, in the end is completely useless. And that's not what ethics is about. And ethics is also not about, just making up your mind to do something today and do something different the next day, or whatever the case might be. It is about constant rational reflection and being able to give reasons for the decision that you have taken. And I think that is, that is a big problem, because of the way in which AI ethics started developing and the way in which different entities started engaging with it, and all those reams, like, 200 documents of AI ethics that saw the light in a few years, and they're all useless because nobody cares to translate them into action. So that's a big obstacle. And then breakthrough moments are simply when people become aware of differences, but then at the same time, and this links back to the obstacles, to understand that if you speak of from a global point of view, there is a bottom line, and the bottom line is protection of basic human rights standards and principles. So, we can have conversations and we can have our reasoned arguments and we can determine, and we have to look at the context and everything, but there is always a bottom line, to at least still, as we speak today, to which people should hold themselves when they have these conversations. But so just awareness of all of these issues actually already for me was a breakthrough moment in the conversations that we had around, for instance, the UNESCO recommendation on the ethics of AI.
I think as South Africans, most of us at least, we are acutely aware of the concept of human rights. I mean, when I was studying law, it was that transition period where we didn't have a constitution, and we are doing constitutional law without a constitution. So, when I think about think about the universal, what is the word, when it's universally applicable, I do believe that there are values that are universally applicable, that everyone agrees on, and that for me is mostly embodied in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. So I mean when I think about, let's go about getting an AI ethics framework, from my very uninformed perspective, the basis of that would be the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. Or am I incorrect in that assumption?
No, I agree with you. It's just that, also in many of the negotiations and discussions, there always the question comes up why is it that we need ethics if we have the Universal Declaration of Human Rights? And we need ethics because ethics is an enabler of human rights and a protector of human rights. Ethics has its ear to the ground. It flags potential transgressions of human rights and of international law in general. So it can point more quickly to potential for violating what we have in place and what we have agreed on. And that as in terms of international law. So I think it's, for me, definitely that's what I also meant when I said it's the bottom line. There is a boundary that you're not supposed to cross. But I do think that ethics, human rights on its own is not enough, and there is a centuries old debate between law and ethics. And we don't want to go into that, but I think the two, from my point of view, the way in which I practice ethics, I see ethics as an enabler. I don't see it as an obstacle to human rights. I don't see it as, some kind of, dive to replace human rights. Not at all. But I do think that international law on its own maybe is not agile enough to keep up with the challenges that we face with emergent technology, and that is where ethicists can play a role. And also in terms of asking the question that I mentioned earlier, to determine what kind of a society it is that we need to have in place. What is it that people would need? If you think in terms of, for instance, capability theory, what is it that people would need, have the right entitlement to, in order for them to build lives of value when they engage with this kind of technology? And those kinds of questions should be asked by ethicists.
So, what would you do if a politician comes up to you and say, these are just talk shops? There's such a big gap between what you guys sit and talk about in terms of international agreements and real world implementation. And so we have examples of firstly, we've seen that getting your big companies to self-police doesn't work. It's always about the bottom line, and there's a significant gap between the international agreements and real-world implementation. So, in your opinion, how do you bridge that distance between UNESCO principles and what's actually happening on the ground? Because on the one, just going beyond that, I mean, you've got the US, which is essentially capitalism at all costs. And then you've got China who's saying, hang on, what are the real threats to our people here and now? And let's put into place the guardrails. That's been my understanding of the legislative approaches. And then you have industry who have the ability to self-regulate, but because it's not in their financial interest, don't to the extent that they can. So what's your opinion on this?
Well, I mean, the simple answer, the answer that I always want to give, and that obviously, doesn't really cut it, but I do want to give it anyway, is that, in the end, we need to make sure that we have more than ethics. So ethics is soft law, and an ethicist cannot hold a company accountable in any kind of legal way. So that's again why we need this allied kind of approach to ensuring benefit to all when it comes to this technology. And then secondly, I mean, if you look at any kind of any kind of policy, whatever its nature, where you have lists of AI principles and you engage with ethics, and those principles are not translated into policy actions and are not translated into, for instance, building in procedural regulations, then you might as well have not engaged with it. So just a quick note on what I mean with procedural regulation. For instance, if you want to ensure data justice, you would, for instance, say, well, we have a mechanism in place where if a company wants to move from the design phase to the development phase of an AI system, they have to respond to questions for instance, like, do you have a member of the community whose data you are using to develop this system in your design team? And will they be part of your development team? And those kinds of questions. So softer regulation, but procedural, so that it blocks certain kinds of actions. But then at the same time, the only language that the private sector companies, especially the big tech companies, understand is financial language. So we have to have very, very strong legislation in place in terms of fines and with the kind of lawsuits and things that we see at the moment in the US, and also maybe from some perspectives, overly stringent EU AI Act, but we in fact need that kind of approach to say, well, there's certain kinds of systems that we simply will not allow. And if you engage in building those kinds of systems, then there will be repercussions for your company. So, on the one hand, we need this kind of hard line, because you cannot negotiate with people whose business model is simply profit, and not just profit. When it comes to AI technology, profit actually is a byproduct of power. It's about data is power. Data is the currency of politics. So, we have to understand that and keep that in mind when we want to talk about translating principles into action. But it's a long road, but it is certainly something that we have to engage with. And we need also not only top-down regulation, we also need bottom-up. So that's why I'm always fighting for the communities who are affected and whose data is used, and they don't benefit. They, in fact, might even be harmed by what is being developed. So I think it is really important, especially in the global south, that we also have this kind of bottom-up procedural kind of regulation to kind of shore up the top-down approaches.
So I've got a corporate risk background, and from my perspective, I maintain for a while now that we cannot, in a VUCA, Barney, polycrisis world, use risk tools that are now obsolete. And in our current environment with hyper innovation, we need to constantly be adapting to keep pace. So, in my opinion, legislation is an example of our inability to keep pace with the evolution of AI. So AI is evolving faster than policy can keep up. This morning I was listening to you guys at the UN on quantum computing. The next thing is AGI, and the next thing, and the next thing. So AI is evolving faster than policy can keep up. How do you balance the need for careful deliberation in international forums with the urgency of governing rapidly advancing technology? And by the nature of the beast, legislation is a very slow moving beast. What must we do? What can we do here to address this?
Yeah, I mean, this is a constant question that comes up, and it comes in various guises. I think it's maybe not. I, I don't think it's about balance, and I don't think it's about keeping up. I think it is simply about building the kind of policy making mechanisms that are supple enough to be able to deal with the kind of challenges that we face from emergent technology. And it's not just AI, as you said, it's quantum technologies, we have space technologies, we have climate technologies, we have nanotechnology, we have synthetic biology, we have all these very, very fast, all the various forms of neurotechnology that are evolving very fast, and all of them have very, very core potential to change the way in which we live our lives and the way in which we think even about what it means to be human. So I think it's more a question of that we have to change the way in which we think about legislation and the way, and just from policy making, from soft moving to firm laws. And we have to focus on society, not the technology. It's not about governing the technology. It's about governing the people who wield the technology for certain reasons. So again, my focus is always on society. What is it that we need to have in place? What kind of societal structures do we need to have in place to ensure that we can, outthink potential harm that might be on the horizon from whatever kind of emergent technology we are talking about. So, I think it's the way in which the world at the moment functions and the way in which legislation is a slow beast. As you said, we can't keep up. But if we take that kind of narrative too far, then we also come up against people who say no. But if you have too much legislation, then you will stop technological advancement, which of course is I think it's a made-up story. I think it's big tech hype. It suits them to say this. People are afraid then of missing out on this fun, wonderful advances. In my country, I'm not allowed to develop these systems. Oh, so we'll always be behind. All those kind of talk. Well, in fact, responsible innovation is the only kind of innovation that is sustainable, and is the only kind of innovation that has the promise to bring benefit to all. So in the end, it saves everybody a lot of time to, from the beginning, engage with technology in responsible ways. And one other way, just sorry I'm long on this, but one other way to like kind of completely flip this kind of keeping up a kind of narrative is to also fight very hard against views of ethics as an add-on. So I've developed my system. Oh, did you do your ethics assessment? No. Okay, let's quickly go through the tick boxes. Ethics is not an add-on. It's not an afterthought. And it's also not only applicable in the design stage. There's a huge movement for value by design and ethics by design, which is wonderful to build in the ethical reflection in the design phase. For instance, concretely to have members of a particular community whose data you're using in your design group to find out what is it that they really need, and how will the system in fact be able to do what it is that you want it to do to bring benefit. But ethics should be part of the development stage, the deployment stage, and the use stage in various forms. And in from the point of view of engineering, these kinds of risk assessments are taken for granted right through the life cycle of engineering systems. But because we talk about ethics, people are not used to thinking of in that way. But if we can kind of make people aware of the benefits of engaging with ethics and building it into the full life cycle of AI systems, then we will have the ethical reflection already in place. We will have the flags in place. We will know what it will take to build a resilient society, and a society that can benefit from AI technology, while we are, going through the life cycle of the system, and not at the end throw our hands up in the air and say, oh, what are we going to do now? But that is so that we need a lot of change in how it is that we think about governance of emergent technology.
I'm just fascinated with words, We're talking about ethics because in my space, I always, for organizational ethics, I tell people it is not compliance. It doesn't belong with compliance because it's an aspirational behavior, and you're using the word ethics and other people are using the word trustworthy and responsible. Do you think the way we use language determines how it's received? Because if we call it ethics, there's an implication that it is not it's a nice to have, but when we are talking about trustworthy and responsible, we are including concepts like privacy, we are including concepts of the safety, AI safety systems. So is it just a question of us selling ethics in another way?
Yeah, language is really important, and I think it is really important to be aware of the different kind of narratives that see the light, and also different kinds of false dichotomies. For instance, if you think of the from the Bletchley Convention in 2023 to all the AI Summit, which was the first AI Summit, that was a safety summit. And then we had the next one was also a safety summit. Was it South Korea, I think? And then in Paris, we suddenly had an action summit. And now in New Delhi next year, we will have an impact summit. So you have to ask yourself where these words come from and who will benefit from them. I think it's really important. So there's also, rhetoric to put harm kind of language as opposed to safety and risk. So ethics and harm versus safety and risk, where in the end, in fact, there is no dichotomy. All of these factors play, interact together and should be taken into consideration together. We need ethics risk frameworks. And robustness, for instance, is an ethics principle. Safety and robustness is an ethics principle in the UNESCO recommendation on the ethics of AI. So, there is so much politics and maneuvering going on in the language of AI that we have to be very aware of what it is that we are doing. For me, I see responsible AI, trustworthiness. I mean, privacy is an ethics principle in the recommendation, for instance, also. So privacy does not necessarily belong, not to ethics. But so, I think we just need to be aware and always ask who speaks. The famous philosopher Friedrich Nietzsche, something that he taught us. Ask who speaks. Why are things the way that they are? Why are we referring to this in the vocabulary? Why are we using the vocabulary that we are using? Who decided? Why did they decide? those are the questions that AI ethicists should also be asking. And also, for instance, who does AI belong to? Does AI belong to big tech companies? Does AI belong to the governments who are trying to regulate it? Does it belong to universities or private sector companies that are funding the research that universities are doing? I think AI belongs to every single person in the street, because it is every single person in the street starter that is driving this technology. But is it practiced in that way? Is it designed in that way? Is it governed in that way? No. And then we should ask why. And why do we allow it to, this kind of situation? So for me, I think it's just, maybe it's because I'm a philosopher, but we need to ask all of these questions, and then we need to try and make sense of the different answers that we get, and ask more questions to understand, the power behind language. And there's so much that has been written in philosophy of language around this. But the more that you hear a word, and that's, the more you start believing it. And that's also why, for instance, the work that we did at the UN advisory body was so important, because at the very least, we did a lot more, but at the very least, we were building an alternative global conversation around AI, an alternative to the big tech hype. Because for many people, that is all that they have. They have the Sam Altmans and they have the Elon Musks to listen to, and they believe every single word that they say, because that is the only kind of interaction that they have with this kind of AI narrative, where in fact there are many different alternatives, but people are not exposed to those. And I see it as part of the work of AI ethicists to ensure that people become exposed to the different kinds of narratives, and to be able to ask questions around what is the power behind this language? Why do they use this word and not that word?
Thanks, Emma. Yeah, but let's get back to what you were talking about in terms of advancing technology, emerging risks, and what are some of those top of mind emerging risks that has you most concerned? So just to contextualize what one of my concerns, and it's not even an emerging risk, it's actually happening. Now, I fundamentally believe in democracy. And I see what's happening in terms of echo chambers, disinformation, and algorithmic targeting in the US. And you see this society fragmenting. And for me, that is like a major risk for all democracies globally. Should I
Yeah.
be not? Is that just a growing pains in terms of the way we deal with tech, or the way we are dealing with uh, with the impacts on society, and we are robust enough to withstand that? Because it's got me really worried. I mean, you can't have a society. The point of a democracy is to each person should have the ability to make a judgment based on facts, which is not happening. And that's also subject to manipulation and bad actors and everything. But as I was just trying to raise that point in terms of emerging risks, but perhaps your perception in terms of emerging risks in emerging technology is something that you could speak about.
Thank you. Well, I agree with you. If I have to think about, the most current, other way I think about is the most current dangers, manipulation. We should have the right to mental integrity. You should have the right to make up your own mind based on your own reasons. There's many very influential people have written about this. For instance, Isaiah Berlin, in terms of positivist, negative liberty, and so on. We should have the right to live authentic lives, and we should have the right to determine what it means to be living an authentic life. but what is happening, and the reason why, you say people should have the right to take decisions based on facts, people do not have the ability to determine what facts are anymore. And part of the reason for that is the pervasiveness of AI. And that is the thing that keeps me up at night. That's the thing that scares me most. And that's the aspect of AI that, in fact, maybe current policy making is not equipped to handle. We are not able to deal with how far AI has become part of people's lives and the complete apathy that many people feel towards violations of human rights, mis and disinformation, even the widening of the inequality gap, abiding by, complying with international law. People simply they don't think in that way anymore. And everywhere where I go, and in the kind of work that I do in the UN world, there is either apathy or antagonism towards multilateralism. And it's a sign of the times. It's where we find ourselves in the world. But this on the one hand, this world has been created to a huge extent, or is driven by AI technology, and at the same time it feeds it. So we have to be vigilant. I say often that we have to maybe go back to the time of the Enlightenment, where the slogan was "Have the courage to think for yourself." But yeah, so I'm very worried. Manipulation, misinformation, disinformation, the widening of inequality, and then peace and security. I think that is a concern that is really stressed in certain circles, but ordinary people on the street do not understand the threat that AI holds for global peace and security, and that should frighten every person, from my point of view.
Thanks, Emma. It is very concerning when you say that there is a negative bias towards multilateralism. And how can you possibly successfully create global governance frameworks without multilateralism? How do you actually approach that?
Yeah, look, I wish I knew. I'm going to be honest with you, but we have to think fast. We have to find different ways in which to approach. I don't know. We can talk about this for a very long time, and we have to ask ourselves if liberal democracies are still the way to go. We can go and look at history and see when did the world come together, always in the face of global challenges, like whether it was nuclear technology or something needed to have happened. In the case where we are now, things are happening and have already happened, but people are lulled into not seeing what is happening. And on the one hand, and then the other hand, they are threatened by the fear of missing out. So, and that is part of the power of the business model of AI. So I think start from the bottom up, start with children, teach them AI, critical AI literacy, push for any kind of workshop or mechanism that will help with AI awareness, understanding one's rights, understanding what effective remedy would mean in the case of harm from AI technology. Civil society in the end, I think, is our secret weapon if we can mobilize civil society, because if people just stop using the technology, and I'm not saying we should stop using the technology, it's a wonderful technology, but we need to understand what it means to responsibly and ethically engage with the technology so that it can bring the good that it can bring, because AI can bring immense good to humanity. It is simply the way in which it is wielded and engaged with that is that's actually the problem, and that brings the threat. But yeah, we are in a overall, I think, global situation where multilateralism, for many various reasons, geopolitical reasons, are given a bad name and not supported. And I think we should fight against that with everything that we have.
I listened for a bit today on the presentation on the children's rights in the age of AI at UNESCO. And one of the things that struck me that someone said was that children deserve a childhood. What does that actually mean in the context of digital natives?
Yeah. Well, again, I don't think there's a one size fits all answer, but I think it means that they need respect. And just in that report from the International Bioethics Committee, which is on mental health of children in the age of AI, being a child is in itself portrayed or interpreted as a value, as being valuable. So one thing that it does mean is that I'm not going to say that you should have X number of hours digital free and children should play outside. Of course, those things are really important. But in terms of mental health, for me, what is perhaps more important is that we understand that issues of intergenerational justice should play a role in all the liberation around global AI governance. And this is mentioned in the Global Digital Compact that was adopted at the UN Assembly last year in September at the Summit of the Future. And this is something that we sometimes forget. We talk about future generations when we think about climate change, but we do not think about future generations when we engage with AI technology. And AI technology is shaping the world in which future generations, near and far future generations, will live. So we are only starting to see the impact of growing up with AI, because we are dealing with the first generation that are now adults who have grown up in the digital age, not necessarily with AI. But so a lot of research is needed, but it is certain that we have a lot of work to protect the rights of children in the digital context. And UNICEF also has done tremendous work in this area. If you are interested, to go and look at some of the work that they have done. There you are. It's a very serious concern and a serious threat.
Thanks, Emma. I like that point you raised about intergenerational justice. And one of my concerns also about emerging tech is the fact that we haven't evolved to the stage that we can say universally we treat each other ethically. We for the majority of ours of people on the planet, that is not true. And what bugs me is that whether it's going to be in our lifetime or not, I don't know. But the idea of us trying, us as a species that does not live by universal ethics or universal values, and creating synthetic sentience, and what our reaction is going to be in terms of non-biological sentience, that's a scary thought for me, because I don't know why, but it's like, okay, we do that to human beings, but somehow to treat an animal badly, it's somehow worse because they don't have agency. And for me, possibly it'll be worse for us. It'll be worse in my mind that human beings treat non biological sentience unjustly.
But I think you need to agree, but to some extent. But I think that's a really big debate, and I think we need to define what treating an AI system badly would mean. We need to define what it is that we would mean, because we would be looking at it from a human point of view, and then we would be asking, so there is a lot that's been written on whether robots are slaves, and robot rights, and artificial personhood, artificial moral intelligence, agency. But I think, we first have to define what we mean with all of these concepts. And in the end, the bottom line is maybe to start with redefining for ourselves what it means to be human. What is it that we want to protect about being human?
Thanks, Emma. Great. Again, today I heard a bit about the recommendations for ethics in quantum computing. Can you explain to me why we can't use the ethical guidelines that we developed for AI for quantum computing?
Yeah, it's actually a question that came up today in the COMEST debate, and we can and we can't. So there was a comment from one of the member states that, oh, it's just the old principles. Well, on the one hand, certain principles like the principle of proportionality, it doesn't matter how old it is still an applicable principle. Specifically in the case of emergent technology, and doesn't matter which kind of technology it is. But what we try to do, and I think that is maybe it's a good way to go for many different reasons, but I'll give you one reason. But let me first tell you the way. We rather try to identify ethical concerns around the potential impact of, for instance, now quantum computing. And then in the context of each ethical concern, we ask ourselves which ethical principles would help us to start building resilience and to protect from potential harm in the context of this ethical concern. So, for instance, we raised the problem of peace and security, the ethical concern of peace and security in the context of quantum computing because of the threat to cryptography and the so-called Q-day, when all encryption systems would be broken. And one of the principles that we call upon is the principle of safety and robustness. And through that principle, we simply say that we have to support post-cryptography research. So, it's for me, it's not about having the lists of principles. It is about knowing why we invoke a particular principle in a particular context, and what actions it is that principle points us towards, so that we can build resilience against potential harm in that context, or so that we can prevent harm from happening at all. So that's why I said in the beginning that just having these lists and lists and lists of principles, ethical principles, really in the end means nothing. So in some cases we will have to come up with new principles, and in other cases principles like multi-stakeholder collaboration, obviously protection of privacy, those kinds of transparency, those kinds of principles are applicable to all emergent technologies from different perspectives, but they are applicable. The precautionary principle, for instance, this is something that is applicable not only in climate debates, but also in space debates, also in quantum technology debates, also in AI debates, synthetic biology, and so on. So it's more about how you actually put meat to the principle in a particular context, and how you are going to translate it into practice, so that it in fact protects, which is what it's supposed to do. But you need to do some work for it to actually fulfill that role.
Thanks, Emma. Just quickly, what does cryptography mean in the context of AI?
Well, if AI is combined with quantum computing, it can just speed up the threat to existing encryption mechanisms. But on its own, this is not a threat for AI on its own. But if it converges with quantum computing, for instance, then it will become, it is a tangible threat that we have to take seriously and that we have to be preemptive towards. That is why we have to actually use quantum computing to build encryption systems that cannot be broken by quantum technology. That's that's part of the thinking around this.
Thanks, Emma. So as we draw into a close, what's your practical advice for normal, ordinary people out there in terms of their interaction with AI? What advice do you have for them?
Ask yourself. So, you and I, we've spoken a few times, but we don't really know each other. But would you give me the right to decide on, what kind of material your child engages with on TikTok? Or would you allow me to decide for you whether you are going to pursue a particular career path or not? I'm just a person that you came across. Forget now that what you know about me in terms of expertise, etc. And we tend not to do that. You will not just, the person who sits next to you on the train, if they tell you how to take care of your child's cough, you will not just go home and rush home and do everything that they told you to do, because you will ask yourself, well, who is this person? What do they know? How do they don't know my child. How can they say this? But when it comes to AI technology, we just slurp everything up. We don't ask questions. We don't ask where this comes from. We don't ask how it will impact our cognitive abilities, how it would impact our freedom, our positive liberty, our ability to make decisions for ourselves. We just use it because it makes our life so much easier. And we don't even realize that we all are living in different bubbles, intersecting bubbles that are little echo chambers. And so I think really what I would want to say is have the courage to think for yourself, stand up, protect your right to think for yourself without being manipulated by somebody on the other side of the world for their profit. So I'm not saying don't engage with AI technology, use it, but outthink the business model. That should be our goal. That should be, ask yourself what it is that you can use your own proportionality principle. Can you do something without AI? Then do it without AI. Why would you need it? Why would you use it if you can do it yourself? So it's just different kinds of, different questions that one needs to ask oneself when one engages with AI.
Absolutely. It seems that it's the time of philosophers and critical thinkers. People go, "Oh, STEM is so important," and all of that. Of course, but behind all the technology are those questions that philosophers need to ask, that critical thinkers need to come to the fore and say, how do we engage with this in a sustainable manner?
Yes. And why? Always the why question. Always the why question. Who speaks? Why are things the way that they are? Why are they not different? Who decides? Those kinds of questions are really important when we engage with any kind of emergent technology. And then the core question: what does it mean to be human? Why is it still an important question to ask? Do we want to be human? Or, if you listen to at some of the rhetoric, there's a lot of rhetoric around post-humanism and transhumanism. So what do those things mean? And those are really serious threats, and is also a debate for another day. But there is a lot of drive towards that kind of thinking. Now, I'm not saying it's necessarily bad, but I am saying that we will then have to be prepared to let a lot go that through centuries of our existence have been sacred to us as the kind of beings that we are. So there are really deep philosophical questions that one has to that ordinary people in the street will have to start engaging with if they want to make sure that they live lives of value in tandem with this technology.
I don't know if I'm too old to comprehend this, but the other day I was reading about neural meshes, into the brain, and they could be linked to a complex system. So you essentially have neural meshes in everyone's brain that links you to a complex system, and basically would have like a hive mentality. And I'm sitting there and I'm thinking, oh my God, it's like an episode of Star Trek or something. Yeah. So,
Yeah,
uh,
no, it's really scary.
Emma, if you could ensure global leaders prioritize one aspect of AI ethics policy development, what would that be?
Enable everyone to become a designer of AI technology. It will also help to break the speed of the big tech business model, and it will help for more equitable and fair discussions around global AI governance. If it is not the case that one part of the world is viewed as only users of AI technology and the other part of the world is viewed as designers of AI technology. And obviously, the global south is viewed as users and the global north is viewed as the designers. And the designers have the power and the users are on the receiving end. And we have to flip that rhetoric. We have to stop that rhetoric because there is a lot that is happening in the global south in terms of AI. But we are dependent on Western infrastructure to use extent. And so, yeah, we need to start becoming aware of this power that we have to be designers of our own AI technology and to be allowed to be given the opportunity or to be allowed to actually actionalize that potential. And we are doing that in South Africa, definitely, but also across the continent. If you think of the deep learning in Daba initiative, and you think of grassroots initiatives like Lelapa AI and so on in South Africa, and data, what is it called? What is it called now? I can't think of the word. I don't know. Data Science Africa, I want to say, but it's not the right term. But there is a lot happening. But it's not, it doesn't get, it doesn't make it to the global conversations, and we should fight against that because we need to be able to design technology to solve our own problems in our own ways, and we can do it.
I had a conversation a couple of weeks ago with a Nigerian developer, and he was talking about, being that affirmative action voice in the room. And I was outraged because the thing is, we create, by nature of the fact that he was talking about, we create such robust systems because we don't have a reliable power supply. We don't have connectivity on a certain basis. All of those things make our product more robust. And I ended up asking a question. I said, okay, when Elon Musk gets onto Mars, whose product do you think he's going to take that can withstand conditions in the middle of Africa or that pristine lab in the middle of Paris? So, yeah, I think
Thank you.
sometimes
I'm 100% with you.
Um,
100%.
I'm not going to ask you what keeps you up at night because we've done that one, but I wanted to ask you what developments in international AI, the ethics cooperation, gives you the most hope or confidence? Because I mean, I'm positive there are silver linings here.
I think that there are more and more voices, and they're not only from the United States, and they're not, they we also have grassroots voices in AI ethics conversations, and there's recognition of different models of ethics governance, which is also really important. So it's not understanding that top down is not always the way to go. And then understanding ethics not only in terms of these reams and reams of principles, but actually as a dynamic reasoning system, as a mechanism that one has to ensure sustainable technology that can benefit everyone. I think this kind of there's a kind of global understanding that is uniting people who work in this field from different perspectives, and also help them to engage with related fields, like for instance, data justice activists relating to design justice activism. So, I think there is a very interesting movement happening in AI ethics away from the principle-driven ethics approaches, more towards grassroots, bottom-up, procedural kinds of ethics.
Fantastic. Professor Emma Ruttkamp-Bloem, thank you for your time and thank you for an extremely fascinating conversation. I'm positive I'm going to speak to you again because I want to discuss post-humanism and transhumanism, amongst other things, with you. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much for having me. Thanks.